Hi, my name is Céline Stenius. I'm a researcher in clinical psychology and contemplative science at the University of Navarra in Spain, and today I'm happy to share with you the presentation I gave at the Association for Psychological Science in May 2026. In this talk, I discussed a series of studies on selflessness and depression, focusing on how the way we relate to the self may contribute to depressive vulnerability. And to make this idea more concrete, I would like to introduce you to Luis. Luis is having dinner with his family, and during a very ordinary conversation, his father casually says, "Hey Luis, did you hear that? Your brother just got promoted." No one means to hurt him. But something shifts. A thought appears in Luis' mind. "I'm not good enough." Very quickly, this thought no longer feels just like a thought. It starts to feel true, personal, and permanent. It becomes difficult to let go of. And for Luis, this comment is no longer just a comment. It becomes a threat to the self. And this is the starting point of this presentation. Can cultivating selflessness reduce this vulnerability? And if so, through which mechanisms? What happened to Luis illustrates a core vulnerability factor in cognitive theory of depression: depressogenic schema. These are broad negative beliefs about the self, other, and the future. In simple terms, they act like great tinted glasses through which any experience is evaluated. Recently, another key process has been highlighted: identity threat appraisal. This refers to the tendency to interpret situations as undermining one's self-image or personal value. In Luis's case, the thought, "I'm not good enough," was not only a negative thought, it actually became a threat to his sense of who he is. In our previous work, we empirically confirmed that depressogenic schema amplify identity threats, which in turn intensifies depressive symptoms. And interestingly, we also found that people with high depressogenic schemas perceive threats not only in negative situations, but also in situations usually associated with personal success. And this is exactly what happened to Luis. He tends to perceive any situation, even the most ordinary ones, through a darker and more threatening lens. So, from here, we ask a further question. Could selflessness act upstream of this vulnerability pathway? And to address this question, we turned to the concept of selflessness. Here, selflessness does not mean that the self doesn't exist. It does not mean self-sacrifice or having a weakened sense of self. Rather, it refers to a more flexible way of relating to self-relevant experiences. And by self-relevant experiences, I mean thoughts, emotions, memories, roles, and personal stories through which people recognize who they are. And in this framework, selflessness has three main foundations: connectedness, which means experiencing oneself as part of a shared human experience rather than isolated from others. We have also impermanence, which means experiencing thoughts, emotion, and self-related experiences as changing rather than fixed. And we have disidentification, which means observing thoughts and emotion without being fully defined by them. So, bringing all these elements together, we developed the model shown here, in which we propose that greater selflessness may reduce depressive vulnerability by first reducing the presuric schema, which may then reduce identity threats. And the two studies I will present in this presentation aimed to test this global model. So, let's begin with study 1, where we tested this model using cross-sectional data. The sample included 357 English-speaking participants, and we measured the 3 dimensions of selflessness, connectedness to humanity, impermanence, and disidentification, along with depressive schemas, identity threats, and depressive symptoms. And the results supported the model. All 3 dimensions of selflessness showed significant indirect associations with lower depressive symptoms. And one particularly important finding concerns impermanence, which shows the strongest indirect associations with lower depressive symptoms. And this suggests that experiencing thoughts, emotion, and self-related experiences as changing rather than fixed may be particularly relevant for depressive vulnerability. However, this first study was cross-sectional, so we couldn't know whether cultivating selflessness actually produced these changes. And this led us to study 2. The key question for study 2 was, can changes in selflessness predict changes in depressive vulnerability over time? And to test this, we used data from a meditation-based intervention with 151 participants who complete a 5-week intervention. In this dataset, impermanence was not assessed, so selflessness was operationalized using only 2 dimensions, connectedness and disidentification. We then modeled pre-post changes and tested the 3 models shown here. Model A was our main theoretical model. It tested the following sequential pathway: selflessness, depressive schema, identity threat, and depressive symptoms. And the results supported this model. Increases in selflessness were associated with reduction in depressive schemas, which in turn were associated with lower identity threat appraisal and lower depressive symptoms. Importantly, the serial indirect effect was significant, whereas the direct path from selflessness to depressive symptoms was not significant. So, Model A suggests that selflessness may reduce depressive symptoms indirectly, first by weakening maladaptive schemas and then by reducing identity threats. Next, we tested an alternative model. In Model B, schemas and identity threats were treated as 2 parallel mediators. So the question here was, do schemas and identity threats operate independently? And apparently not, as you can see the model showed very poor fits, so this seems more consistent with a sequential interpretation where schemas may come first, followed by identity threat appraisal. And finally, we wanted to better understand the components of selflessness. So in Model C, we tested connectedness and disidentification separately. The results showed a clear pattern. Connectedness was mainly associated with lower identity threats, which in turn was associated with lower depressive symptoms. Disidentification, in contrast, was mainly associated with lower depressive schema, which then predicts lower identity threat and lower depressive symptoms. So here the findings suggest that different dimensions of selflessness may reduce vulnerability through different psychological pathways. Overall, findings from both studies may have several implications, clinical implications. The main implication is that depression prevention may benefit from targeting the way people relate to the self. And this is not only about changing negative thoughts, it's also about loosening the way these thoughts become tied to identity. And if we return to Louis, the goal is not simply to tell him that the thought "I'm not good enough" is wrong. The goal is to help him create space around this thought. For example, with disidentification, Louis may learn to observe jealousy, shame, or threats without being fully defined by them. With impermanence, he may remember that these painful moments, this emotion, and even his current life situation are not fixed, rather inherently changing over time. And with connectedness, the comparison with his brother may feel less like an attack on his worth and more like one moment within a broader family and human context. So in this sense, selflessness may help Louis move beyond an automatic reaction of threat, withdrawal, and self-devaluation. So of course, it does not remove pain, but it may open new ways of relating to it. And of course, there are important limitations. First, future studies should include longer follow-up periods and additional measurement points to better understand how these mechanisms unfold over time. Second, these findings should be replicated in clinical samples. And finally, the measurement of selflessness remains a major challenge. Indeed, our measures mostly capture cognitive and emotional aspects of selflessness, but selflessness also involves, and perhaps especially involves, a deeper transformation in how the self is experienced. So, as a final thought, I would like to say that depression may not only emerge when people suffer, it may also emerge when suffering becomes too tightly attached to the self. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope this presentation opens interesting questions, and I would be very happy to hear your thoughts or comments. Thank you.